How we doing? Good. 2 more weeks in the semester. You're almost there. Deep breaths, deep breaths. But don't leave yet. We've got some fun stuff planned tonight. Welcome everybody to a celebration of literature and living writers. My name is Megan Marshall, and I'm the director of the Hugh C. Hyde Living Writers series. This is actually the final event of the year, which is a little bit sad, but you know, I couldn't think of a better way to conclude the series than by celebrating the 25th anniversary of SDSU's beloved literary journal, Poetry International. Yeah. As an MFA student maybe like too many years ago, I had the pleasure of interning for PI, and it was really cool to be a part of such a rich community of global letters, and I learned a lot about publishing. I learned a lot about the importance and the power of translation, and I also learned a little bit about running a reading series, which sort of has instructed me in my directorship that I'm doing right now. So I owe a debt of gratitude to Poetry International. Speaking of gratitude and also of the community, I would like to acknowledge this space that we are privileged to share. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been part of this land. Land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations. And as members of the San Diego State University community, we acknowledge this legacy. I'd also like to take a moment to thank those who have helped to make this event and this series possible, and that includes all of our friends here at Love Library, Markle Tumlin, my fabulous co-host, who deserves a round of applause all by himself. We couldn't do it without Markle, so we're so thankful for you, Markle. Also, our other friends at Love Library, Danya Luca Hall, Laura Bliss, and Rebecca Williamson. I want to thank my roadie, Sean, who's been managing the recordings all semester. Yeah, he's cool. We like him. I'd also like to thank the Department of English and Comparative Literature for their continued support of this series. And of course, all of our folks and our friends from Poetry International, who you're going to hear from tonight. Just a few reminders, if you haven't done so already, please silence your cell phones and know that this event is being recorded, but don't worry, you only see this. So, I'm going to turn things over to Sandra Alcosser. In addition to being Poetry International's stalwart editor-in-chief, Sandra is the author of 2 collections of poetry, A Fish to Feed All Hunger and Accept by Nature, which received the highest honors from National Poetry Series, Academy of American Poets, and associated writing programs, as well as the Larry Levis Award and the William Stafford Award for Poetry. She was the National Endowment for the Arts' first conservation poet for the Wildlife Conservation Society and Poets House, New York, as well as Montana's first poet laureate. She also founded and directs SDSU's MFA program in creative writing, which is a huge deal. So please give a warm welcome to Sandra Alcosser.
Hi, everybody. I've been teaching for the last 5 hours straight, so forgive me if I'm a little tired tonight, but I'm really happy to see all of you and to see so many friends in the audience. So, welcome to the 25th year of Poetry International, a celebration of cities that arise at a moment of great consequence early in the 21st century. The cities of the world are under assault. The borders are lined with families seeking shelter, seas warming and rising, causing uplift, tornadoes, terrorism, piracy, famine, and drought. At this moment, we're reminded of the importance of bearing witness to what contributing editor Jenny Minetti Shippey called the mystery of our histories. In a letter to Boccaccio in the 14th century during another pandemic, Petrarch suggested that poets must write just as the bees make honey, not keeping the flowers, but turning them into a sweetness of our own, blending many different flavors into one, which shall be like them all and better. And the city, with its myriad winding stairs and unlit alleys, lace shops and pastry displays, layered pavements of granite and gneiss, is after all the poet's honeycomb. For many poets, home is the city itself. Anna Akhmatova, who suffered greatly under Soviet rule, remained wedded to St. Petersburg and wrote, even after the murder of her first husband, "I am not among those who abandoned this land. No one wants to help us because we stayed home. Because loving our city and not winged freedom, we preserve for ourselves its palaces, its fire and water." One hears an echo of this with Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish in the poem, "I Belong There." To break the rules, I've learned all the words for a trial by blood. I've learned to dismantle all the words in order to draw from them a single word, home. Poets from Charles Baudelaire to Georges Louis Boyce followed Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Man of the Crowd, as the invention of the carbon arc street lamps permitted Poe to wander among the dimly lit faces of city boulevards. Baudelaire, who called himself the alchemist of the world, initiated the poetry of the modern city when he wrote of Paris in Fleur de Mal, "You gave me your mire, and I turned it into gold." The photographer Nadar described Baudelaire, this alchemist, in Walter Benjamin's Arcades project, with rose-colored gloves quite new, thus arrayed and hatless, Baudelaire walked about his quartier of the city at an uneven pace, both nervous and languid like a cat, choosing each stone of the pavement as if he had to avoid crushing an egg. Of course, not every poet rejoices in the fluidity of playing flaneur in the arcades of Paris. The Brazilian poet Adelia Prado contends that she's never been at ease in her city. I'm from the Middle Ages, and Gibbonopoulos sometimes strikes me as silly. It's always felt too new. There's no steeping stonework, no antiques. The lack of history almost makes it not a real city. I'm fascinated by really old cities, but I discovered that the Gibbonopoulos in my poems, the city of my childhood, is something else, almost a dream of itself. Because I find the smell of newness distressing. My soul is medieval, and so is my writing. And when this happens, a poet might turn away from the page and enter another city. So tonight we're going to have some of our poets step off the pages of Poetry International, and with the help of Megan Marshall, bring them up on the screen. This one, some of you are familiar with, Kevin Pruford, who was here 2 weeks ago. And he is the first poet. Most of our portfolios are translations, but he's the first poet, or he's the only poet in the portfolio section who is not translating. He is as you know, a poet, editor, scholar from the University of Texas at Houston.
Hi, I'm Kevin Cooper, and this is my poem, "The Cities, the Armies," from the new issue of Poetry International. The cities, the armies. In the bright days of ancient Rome, when a child was born unwanted, her father might choose exposure, which meant he might abandon the infant in the forest where eventually she would no longer be a burden to the family. For years, I tried to understand the mind that could be right with this. A child in the leaves, crying into the night, the hungry wolves. I could not understand it, but there it was in the history books. The Romans have spoken to me over the centuries, and I have listened carefully and loved them more than I have loved even my friends. They whisper into my ear, and I write down every word they say, and have made a career of it, made a convenience of them. What excites me most is their apparent familiarity that doesn't quite conceal their foreignness. They are a foreign mind, an alien mind. They who could expose a child so easily, and thus make resonant the stories of Moses, of Romulus and Remus, of Oedipus or Hercules. Fuck, I have lived 50 years and hope I have done as little harm as possible, though I doubt it. My mother inherited her mother's senility, by which I mean she loses her glasses all the time, and probably will eventually forget who I am. I do not want forgetfulness for myself, though I suppose in a broader sense, it might be a mercy to forget who we once were. These days, she reads the same book over and over and seems happy with that. It is a book I gave her about the many empires that preceded us. Listen to this, she keeps saying. Can you imagine the armies? Can you imagine the cities these people once built?
In some cases, the poet is not content with a single city, but wanders many, as the Haitian writer Louis Philippe Delamere does in another new portfolio, calling himself a self-proclaimed vagabond. We had hoped to have the poet himself read the poem in French, but he wrote to his translator. You could bring up his picture now, you can get it. I don't know if I told you, I don't have a cell phone. And since I'm writing a new novel, unfortunately, I won't have time to learn how to record it on my computer. I'm sorry, it will be for next time. I kiss you, LPD. And now this is Nancy Naomi Carlson, his translator, reading Don't Be Afraid.
And if y'all have a copy of the journal, it's on page 76.
Sorry, I forgot.
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to say it. I'm an immigrant, a boat people, a border crosser, a piece of dirt, the one to blame for all ills wherever I go, the one you sometimes fetch, then send back home, when no longer of any use. I'm a Kleenex man, a toilet paper woman, a fly you expel with a wave of your hand, a cloud you burst to rekindle the sun, or so you let the comic book believe. I'm the one who sometimes comes, for better or worse, to knock at your door when you're having family dinner, evicted by scores of tsunamis from his own home. The woman who catches the straps you toss her way while you huddle behind your Catholic gray shield. The woman who's braved the elements to come knock at your door. Don't be afraid to say it. I'm an immigrant person, a Palestinian without a sucker to plant his roaming, a Tibetan without a name, a Haitian woman with fallow dreams, driven back wherever she goes. Don't be afraid. I'm like you, a human being.
And in the portfolio exploring the literary wealth of the Armenian diaspora, we visit the Armenian community of Fresno, California, in this poem by Aram Saroyan, writing his father, William Saroyan, and his father's friend. Saroyan reminds us that even among uprisings and meteoric climbs to celebrity, the endurance of kinship remains strongest, and the poem is on page 96.
Saroyan and Manasseh. Reading of Lipo and Tufu, I think of my father and his cousin, Archie. Of Manassian and Saroyan, two strange friends from their Fresno childhoods. Then one climbed the heights, while the other only a painter's ladder. Yet each set his sights on the same prize, a simple delight in the language that made a poem, or a poem in prose. How they cracked one another up, laughing as if life weren't sad at all, but touched by magic.
Following the translation shared by contemporary poets and portfolios set in El Salvador, we had a couple portfolios from a wonderful translator from El Salvador, Haiti, Iceland, Armenia, and Spain. The last, Blas Falca's translations of Mariana Zaro. We begin a celebration of the last 25 years of Poetry International with works selected by our editorial assistants and interns. Poems like this one by Kwame Dawes, the poet and novelist from Ghana and then Jamaica, and now professor at the University of Nebraska and editor of the wonderful journal Prairie Schooner. And he is reading the Negre de Paris, page 283.
Hello, my name is Kwame Dawes, and I'm ready to read a poem. It's been published in Poetry International. Poem is titled Lele. These days I study old photographs and collect those with bodies facing away, their backs, their heavy coats, their shawls and hats. As they move in crowds through cities covered in snow, or slicked with rain, or washed in plain light. And I imagine these are the bodies of Black people, recolonizing the continent. And this is how I find my company here, far from home. How I show love, how I feel safe. Every back is seen is a blood maker. Thank you.
You should, if you are interested in African poetry, Kwame Dawes and Chris Abani have put together a series, and they have. If you go to Kwame Dawes' website, at the bottom you'll see a live link to go to his African poetry page, and it's really wonderful. Aside from that, they've been putting out. They decided they were going to do this for 10 years, and Chris and Kwame have put together a collection of chapbooks, 10 chapbooks each year for 10 years of African poets. And so you can get those as well. So now I'd like to introduce some members of our team who will each read from the journal a poem that they selected. So if you all want to come up here at one, and I'll introduce, and then you can read. So Paula, Haley, Paula Jason is a new MFA alum and our managing editor. Haley Gross, a second-year MFA who edits PI Online. Luis Torres, a first-year MFA who is our submissions editor. And the longest-serving member of the journal is Dulce Arteaga, our social media editor. So I assume I'm going first. Okay, now to find the poem I'm going to read. And I didn't follow your instructions, Sandra. So I didn't print it out huge. So everyone be. Of course, I lost my place. But while I'm looking for my place. She never follows my instructions. No. Tension is the whatever, where creativity is born. One thing that this volume is full of amazing poets, amazing poems, renowned poets. It's sort of awe-inspiring when you look at the whole thing together. One of the things that I'm really proud of that we do, besides
that, house the work of these amazing poets and bring it to people is we hold 4 contests a year, 2 for chapbooks, and 2 honoring individual poems. One's the Poetry International Prize, and the other's the Cavafy Prize, CP Cavafy Prize. And well, whatever, I won't go in. Think when I first came to Poetry International, I didn't know who CP Cavafy was, but now I do. So anyway, but one thing that's very exciting about that is that people send you their work, and it's an amazing honor and challenge to read through and cull through and find what is a prize-winning poem, what is this, and and it's sort of an amazing experience, and it's a humbling experience. And I have one I want to read, and I better hurry up and find it. This poem was chosen ultimately by Wislawa Szymborska, the opposite of poetry, and I'm going to find it here. Yes, and it wasn't his first choice, but he impulsively honest. So, but it wasn't his first choice. But what happened is we kind of went back and forth and looking, and this one just kept. He told me it kept coming back to him. Every day he'd get up and read the ones that we had sent to him, and this one just kept haunting him. It's a poem about grief, and it's a beautiful poem, and I'm sorry that I'm taking forever to find it, but I will. It's at the end, but I don't. Oh, here, okay, I'm close, I'm sorry, people breathe, meditate. Okay, I found it, yeah, okay. It's by Patrick James Arrington, and it won the 2020 Poetry International Prize. It's called The Opposite of Poetry.
397.
397. We should have said that earlier. This is a poem about grief. So, okay. They've been telling her over and over again to speak about it. If not to them, well, to someone, no one even, get it into words. That old saying about how a mountain can only be moved one little stone at a time. After all, we say flower to hold this writhing into color. I say nothing. As she invites me into a room strewn with them. As she shuts the door quick against the wind, moves off to make tea. Nothing, as a minute later I hear a cup shatter across the kitchen floor. As I hear, then a door open, close. Hear what sounds like someone scream once wildly into the storm. Nothing. Still as storm becomes a stillness, as she comes in again, takes the dustpan from me, as she wraps each piece one by one in tissue, places them in the bin. Still, a cup despite everything. We sit for a long while, her and me not moving. Each word rolled smoother than any stone in my mouth. Her grief, like no flower in this world. Don't worry, dear, she says, when I, later, pick up my coat to leave. I'll manage. For every word there is, I know, another. For every sentence, at least one that reads only, no, 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 no.
That's how this works. Okay. Hi, I'm Haley. Thank you all for being here this evening. I'm going to share Plantains by Juan Carlos Galeano. It's translated by Scott Bailey and Rebecca Morgan. Plantains. We are 2 plantain trees next to the river. What else can we do? Everything ends except this love. Our bunches hanging in the rainy breeze, the caressing whispers at night. The foolish tomatoes would change color if they saw us together in the daylight. The breeze and our bodies, without bills or telephones, without searching for each other in the world. Only plantains, happy with the sun and many rains so the family can grow. In the afternoon, we thank the sun for his colors, and he brings them back without fail the next day. Everlasting plantains until they tell us to leave for somewhere else. In the meantime, we're caressing and whispering beside the river with some clouds, our friends, and some trees, our witnesses.
Hiya. I'm Zulfa. I will be reading Immigrant Blues by Liang Li, and that's on page 201 if you're following along. And if you're not, you can just hear me read it. All right. Immigrant Blues by Liang Li. People have been trying to kill me since I was born. A man tells his son, trying to explain the wisdom of learning a second tongue. It's an old story from the previous century about my father and me. The same old story from yesterday morning about me and my son. It's called Survival Strategies. And the melancholy of racial assimilation, it's called psychological paradigms of displaced persons, called the child who'd rather play than study. Practice until you feel the language inside you, says the man. But what does he know about inside and outside my father, who has spared nothing in spite of the language he's used, and me, confused about the flesh and the soul, who asked once into a telephone, am I inside you? You're always inside me, a woman answered, at peace with the body's finitude, at peace with the body's disregard of space and time. Am I inside you? I once asked, lying between her legs, confused about the body and the heart. You don't believe you're inside me, you're not, she answered, at peace with the body's greed, at peace with the heart's bewilderment. It's an ancient story from yesterday evening, called Patterns of Love in Peoples of Diaspora, called Loss of the Home Place and the Defilement of the Beloved, called I Want to Sing, but I don't know any songs. Thank you.
That was really beautiful. I'm going to read a prose poem by Vahe Godel, translated from French by John Taylor. And I'm a huge enthusiast of the prose poem. It's cool that this one's translated from the French because it originated in the 1800s from French authors who wanted to escape some restrictions that they felt they had on themselves with poetry. So this one is called The Law of Numbers. Having reached the age at which, almost overnight, my mother's voice and face changed, at which my father began to lose both memory and eyesight, I keep chewing away at numbers, abandoning myself to strange calculations. I, who never had a liking for arithmetic and who was a dunce in the subject. How many years did my mother live? My father's age when he stopped living, their exact dates of birth and death, the house number in the narrow street where I began my existence, the number of inhabitants of my place of origin, the distance separating me from the nearest shore. I add up, subtract, divide, multiply, everywhere, anytime, against my will. The number of women who offered me room and board, the number of pages that I have covered with ink in an attempt to clarify matters, the number of sleepless nights that I have had to sit through at my double's bedside. I add, deduct, transform the sum into a remainder, subtract all of it from the next to nothing. My own weight, my height, my collar size, my shoe size, the hour of my birth, my secret code, my blood pressure, the cell phone number of my unique inheritor. I total up, decompose, combine, convert, accumulate, cancel, recover, the number of steps, the number of deaths, the surface area of cultivable lands, the duration of the trip, the exchange rate, the flow rate of the stream, the wind speed, the ground temperature, the amount of losses, the remaining funds, the carrots, the indexes, the scales, wearing myself out while pursuing the shadow of the golden ratio, the price of blood, the height of the tower, the depth of the lake, the width of the river, the length of the bridge, the weight of silence, the number of words, syllables, keystrokes that would be necessary to finish the last sentence.
Fredmore Markle, a longtime professor of modern and contemporary poetry at SDSU and a poet himself, designed the first journals and served as the editor-in-chief for the first 12 issues. He was succeeded by Ilya Kaminsky, a much-loved member of our MFA faculty for 12 years, and Katie Ferris, who has assembled a brilliant collection of prose from around the world that appeared previously in Poetry International, curating sections titled "The City Where God Goes Around Pouring Salt into Human Beings," "The City of Flying Audiences," "The Chosen City of Someone Who Hungers and Someone in Need," and "The City of Faith I Cling to." We have a surprise guest here this evening who has a poem in that section that I wonder if you would come over and read. Megan Marshall.
Sandra, you are. Sandra sent me the lineup for the reading, and there was a surprise reader in there, and I was like, ooh, who are we going to bring? This is so disappointing that it's just me. What page is it on?
371.
371. Okay. Hi. I actually started the first version of this piece while I was in the MFA program. It has since been through many different iterations, and it here has its original title. Walt Whitman left the supermarket and walked to my house. I celebrated myself last night to the chagrin of Walt Whitman. We leaned and loafed quiet on lawn chairs in the curled crabgrass of my backyard wasteland. I sipped vodka with soda and lime while Walt dipped his beard into a heel of scotch, trying to loose the stop in his throat. The full night trill settled in a drooping bottle brush. I wanted validation, to plunge my tongue into his heart, but instead I spoke, lime running down my chin. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to rip hungry minds with the smoke of my breath, with poetry and song and 5-paragraph argumentative essays. I will help them sound barbaric yaps over the roofs of academia. Still silent, Walt picked at a pesky hangnail. Show me your multitudes, Whitman. I want to be a bold swimmer where you wash the gum from my eyes. He wobbled to his feet, chucked his scotch into the shadows. I rubbed his beard like a genie's bottle, and he slapped my hand. Apparently, icons aren't guidance counselors, and they waste your good scotch. So I and my mysteries, here we still stand. Thank you.
And soon, Megan will be joining our team at Poetry International. The journal closes with 7 essays selected by Jenny Minetti Shippey, who served as the inexhaustible and irrepressible managing editor of Poetry International from 2009 to 2019. Auden, whose iconic setting was Iceland, claimed in his commonplace book, A Certain World, that self was one city, this cell where each must find his comfort and his pain. And in these essays, we read a mind turned inward to consider how one poet's work might impact us all. We celebrate in this issue not only 25 years, but also the good fortune of a foundational gift from Edwin A. Watkins, an epidemiologist and global traveler who supported the arts and languages in San Diego and dedicated his bequest to the memory of his mother, the poet Lavinia Adele Watkins, with only the directive that we solicit submissions from poets throughout the world and distribute the journal nationally and internationally. For this anniversary edition, assembled during a pandemic, climate crisis, and world uprisings, it's never been more important to have these shared conversations in verse and prose on the page. I want to close now with two poems. One of the things I want to say is all of these poets who have been up here on the screen were nominated for Pushcart Award. And so hopefully San Diego will make it with Pushcart Poetry International Awards this year. The first one is by the wondrous poet Jane Hirschfield, who's been a longstanding friend of SDSU for over 3 decades. The first time she wrote to me when I first came here, a bunch of people wrote and suddenly wanted to come and read. And it's like, I don't have the money in my pockets, you know. So she drove down and she said, I'm just going to come down. This was from up in the Bay Area. I'm just going to come down and buy some pots down there. And I didn't have any place to put her up, so she slept on a student's sofa. And that became the beginning of a really, really wonderful friendship. In fact, the poem that she's going to read, I picked out in my house when she was staying there the last time. So this time, she's in Belfast, Ireland, and she wrote to me. She's been there for a month as a Seamus Heaney International Visiting Poetry Fellow at Queen's University. She said of the journal, what an honor to be in this company. I could spend the next year, I think, happily reading only this single volume and feel the world's poets with me. Her poem is I Ran Out Naked in the Sun, and it appears on page 225.
I ran out naked in the sun. I ran out naked in the sun. And who could blame me? Who could blame me? The day was warm. I ran out naked in the rain. And who could blame me? Who could blame the storm? I leaned toward 60 that day, almost done. It thundered then. I wanted more, I shouted more. And who could blame me? Who could blame had been before? Could blame me that I wanted more?
That's the first time she'd done a poem like that. And she couldn't understand why I liked it. And then Garrison Keillor backed me up because he got her on and read that poem. And so last, I want to send you off now, and hopefully inspired enough to write your own poem of the city. San Diego needs its poem. Yes. With a kind of blessing from beloved dear friend from Santa Cruz, the poet Ellen Bass, whose poem, The Lesser Gods, appears on page 222.
Hello, this is Ellen Bass, and I'm reading The Lesser Gods. Jupiter's bruised. Something snapped into it on Sunday, leaving a black eye the size of the Pacific. Its strong gravity acting like a shield protecting the Earth. As one astronomer explained, we should thank the giant planet for suffering for us. I'm not sure Jupiter is a Christ, but as I sit on my front steps reading the paper,
Garbage and green waste lined up curbside. Plastic wheels deep in spent rose petals. Sunlight spilling in the blossom-bent spines. I think how easy to be inspired by the more theatrical gods. The sun, the moon, the god of desire. Bees throbbing in the throats of these roses. The roses, how natural to praise them. But what about the modest, neglected deities? The overlooked, who've never had a temple built to them. So this morning I raised my cup of fragrant coffee to the god of mold, pulsing each shower brow. Rust, eating the bent lip of the paint can. Bacteria toiling in the landfill, and all the other detritivores, millipedes and woodlice, burying beetles. Also the fly god, who lands on my hand, thorax glowing emerald iridescence, and the god of maggots, whose infinite mouths scrape the corpses of reindeer and doves, raking our own humbled flesh after our visit to this small planet. They graze, filter, scavenge, and browse.
That's all, folks. Thank you very much.
All right, so we do have a little time for a few questions. We have a wealth of knowledge in the room, so we might as well take advantage, right? So questions for any of our editors, our interns, my students, I'm winking at you. We have some questions for Sandra, for Paula. Yes.
Really like your poem.
Thank you very much. Very nice. Questions. Thank you. Yes.
I know it's probably pretty complicated, but like what goes into like the decision process of like choosing poems for this specific publication?
Yeah, so what goes into the choosing of the poems, the decision process for Poetry International?
Okay,
Sandra.
yeah.
It's interesting. I read or had Aram Saroyan read his poem from the Armenian diaspora. And I give this as an example of how we look at the work that comes to us. It was one of our students, actually, a graduate of our program, who got in touch with me and asked if I would be interested in Armenian poetry. And I said, yes, absolutely. And so we ran something first in PI Online. And I had to ask him at that time, it wasn't his writing, it was another poet's. And I had to ask him, it was about the bombing of a church, and it was a poem about a bombing of a church in Nagorno-Karabakh. And somehow it turned what they wrote about it into a rallying cry for Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And I had to then write back to him and explain, we don't take sides. That's probably the first thing. We simply don't take sides. We're here as a magazine, as a journal, literary journal, looking for the best poetry and looking for, well, I guess I would say we're a peace-loving journal. So I don't know if that answers your question, or if you want to get into the weeds a little bit more, because we could get into the weeds. We have this round table from 2 to 3 every Wednesday where we sit and pull poems up on the screen and talk about them and why, as a group, why we like them, why they work, why they don't work, and so forth.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
I was wondering how the order of the pieces in the journal is decided.
And we had fun with it. It took us a while to get this first journal out when we all came together and there was so much to be figured out. And Paula has done just remarkable work with the journal. She has a background in editing and publishing, and she's teaching the editing and publishing class this semester. So we went ahead and we thought we had one thing and we were moving in one direction. And then I said, we had all the award winners up at the front. And then I said, I'd really like to have the portfolios up at the front. And then it was purely by accident. I've written to Kevin Proofer because he does this Unsung Masters series, and I was I wanted to hear, but I was occupied at the time. So I wrote to him to find out if he was videotaping it. And he wrote back and we started an email exchange. And he said, I've never sent anything to Poetry International. And so that portfolio came in really late. We thought we were going to do all translations. And we have other translations throughout the book. And what we try to do is have it in the original language as well as in English. And it happened that whole portfolio was about the cities. And it just all came together like that because there were so many poems and so many prose pieces about the cities. And that was what really brought made the order cohere. So it was a little bit like writing a poem. You're always cutting it and moving it around and knocking things out and bringing them back and so forth. So it was as much a surprise to us as we went forward as anything.
Yeah, I'm wondering, are there any aesthetic commonalities that submission readers have discerned amongst what's been submitted by their direction that people who are submitting are going, you're seeing come up again and again?
Well, I was looking to see who's here. Hey, Alejandra, you want to weigh in on that one?
No.
Cecilia. Are there, what is, Jeff, you want to?
Yeah, are there any aesthetic commonalities that you're seeing in submissions that people are sort of geared towards?
There's some more politically motivated poems. We do get a pretty good variety, I'd say. And we just say, oh, I see this not to do. We allow a typical list. We can allow a list type poem, which is kind of maybe not that. A lot of personal poems with like a lot of emotional impact and meaning.
Luis, how about you? You're our submissions editor.
Yeah, I would say we don't get a lot of prose poems for one. We get a lot of just the standard poetry with many different varieties really touched on. In our previous Catholic competition, there was quite a few that touched on the issues going on, abroad, like Spain and whatnot. And it was really cool also seeing international voices, not from the U.S., touching on other issues that we might not be so focused on here. And then aside from that, like it's just, you never know what you're gonna get, and that's part of the fun, the unexpectedness of it. And it's the best feeling when you read something that's really surprising because it's so great. It's one of the best feelings after filtering through, a pool of, generally, at times really welcome poems. That really great one.
There's nothing more disappointing. It's like sitting at the Thanksgiving table and there's nothing good to eat. Something's gone wrong. There are days like that where, and then we have to just kind of say, well, wasn't there one that you really liked?
Maybe lastly, if students are thinking about submitting, what advice would you give to them aside from go to the website, check it out?
What would I suggest? Well, our portfolios and so forth are by invitation. And they come to us as a surprise. And all of our other things are competitions, the PI prize and the Cavafy prize. And so that, what are we looking for the PI prize and the Cavafy prize? Poems that just burn off the page. I was showing them one that I picked by Felicia Zamora's last year for the Cavafy prize. And I said, you know, this isn't the kind of poem that we usually respond to. For the most part, we don't select a lot of prose poetry. For the most part, I would say, show a preference for the lyric. And yet Felicia's poem burned off the page, absolutely burned. And I said, you know, would we turn down the late Allen Ginsberg? You know, because maybe his poem looks like a prose poem, or it doesn't sound like a lyric, and so forth. And I said, no, we're looking for the poem that everyone at the table gets excited to read. So I'm sorry, I can't be more specific than that because we don't know until it's in front of us.
I think that's wonderful. Write a poem that burns off the page. Yeah, energy. All right, let's thank Sandra.
There are copies of the 25 anniversaries on first sale over there in the back. They make wonderful holiday gifts for yourself or for others. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Good luck with finals, and we will see y'all next year.